Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Wednesday, March 13th. What is up, everybody? It's been a crazy week in the NBA. A lot of really awesome matchups, which we're going to talk about in a second. Some pretty unfortunate injury news as well. I know the sports world is, of course, focused on all the craziness around NFL free agency for what it's worth, but we are, of course, going to be locking in on redrafting the 2023 NBA draft. So obviously the draft that was 9 months ago at this point in time. We're going to be redoing it, going through what exactly these teams would do if they had the information that's available today about this current draft of rookies out there in the NBA. So we're going to talk more about that in a second, but I did just want to fly around the league, go through some headlines before we go through this first redraft exercise. And have to start things off by calling myself out. I do think for a hot second there, I did curse my favorite team. As you guys saw on the last episode, if you guys were kind enough to watch that, I did really talk about my team, which has been the best team in the NBA all year long, the Boston Celtics. Really the first time all year I talked about them, just because there wasn't much to say. They'd been so dominant. I didn't have a lot of controversy or hot takes on my Celtics, so I just really wanted to lay it all out as a Celtics fan right after they were on an 11-game winning streak, right after they beat the crap out of Golden State in primetime. Immediately after I record that podcast, they blow a 20-point lead in the fourth quarter against the Cavs in Cleveland, and the Cavs were undermanned for what it was worth. Dean Wade just looked like the best player in the NBA and scored like 18 points in the fourth or something crazy like that. It was pretty nuts to watch. It was a really terrible collapse for my Celtics. And then the next game, immediately after, they have to play the Nuggets in Denver. Super close game back and forth. I'm sure you guys have seen it by now. But of course, the Celtics did end up falling short in that one. Jokic looked unstoppable. The Nuggets' late game offense looked unstoppable. We really didn't have any answer for Jokic, certainly all game, as no team really does. And most importantly, Tatum was really just MIA on the other end for us. And so it was really discouraging. I'm not going to lie. The loss to Cleveland is what it is. I mean, look, we're going to let our foot off the gas, and that's just going to happen with getting up on a bunch of teams. Like, we're going to blow a lead at some point, and it is disappointing that it came against a team that we might face in the playoff, against a team that again was undermanned. But I'm willing to live with a loss like that every once in a while, since we're basically locked up to be the one seed at this point in time. But the Denver loss definitely means something. Like, call it what it is. But both teams were fully healthy. Both teams were clearly taking it super seriously. It looked like a playoff game out there, just like it did the first time when those two teams faced off, and the Nuggets gave the Celtics their first home loss of the entire season, which was about 2 months ago at this point in time. But that being said, there were some positives to take away, right? It looked like the Celtics were going to be, fall behind a little too far in that game. Jaylen Brown looked amazing for the most part, despite the fact that he couldn't make a free throw. But inevitably, it does seem to matter that the Nuggets have the best player in the series, and it's not going to be particularly closer in the matchup for what it's worth. We don't know that's going to be the finals matchup, but Jokic is unbelievable, and he's just so consistent. Meanwhile, Tatum, he does have these off nights where he looks totally out of it. He just wasn't even involved in the offense, and he did have a moment where he could have hit a three and given the Celtics a late second lead after a flurry late in the fourth quarter. But it does suck. I can't pretend that it doesn't suck. We don't even get another crack at these guys. We are going to be 0-2 against the Nuggets this time in the regular season. It's not like we would be totally toast if we were to see the Nuggets in the NBA Finals, but it's definitely not encouraging. I can understand why people would just pick Denver outright, and Denver would be everyone's favorite, and I really can't be upset with that as a Celtics fan. I think if you pick anyone besides Denver or the Celtics right now as your team to inevitably win it all, I think you're just trying to be a little too hot takey for my liking. But that being said, it was discouraging, but the Celtics were able to bounce back a little bit, right? They were able to win their last three since then. They beat Phoenix in an interesting game this past weekend in which Durant looked unbelievable, but they were able to win in Phoenix, in Portland, and then most recently in Utah last night. So the Celtics will be just fine. Just wish I would have maybe recorded that after the Nuggets game, but whatever. That's on me. Let's move on to some of the injury news around the NBA, because unfortunately there was a lot of it, and we do have to start off with the Minnesota Timberwolves and Karl Towns. A couple days ago at this point in time, it was announced that Karl Towns did tear his left meniscus. He's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks, and in all likelihood, it looks like he could come back for the playoffs. Maybe it's as early as round 1, maybe round 2, maybe even the Western Conference Finals if Minnesota's able to make it that far without Towns. But it's tough. It's certainly tough for a team that it felt like they were finally going to correct some playoff demons that have been hanging over their head since 2004. That is the last time they've won a playoff series, a full 20 years ago at this point in time, which is just insane to think about. But again, I wouldn't totally write the Wolves off. I do think they'll slide down the standings a little bit. They probably won't drop below like the 4 seed based on how things are in the West right now, but really who knows. But The positive thing for the Wolves is, look, you still have your best player. You still have your leader on the court in Anthony Davis, who we'll talk more about in a second. And the exciting thing about it is, like, look, the Timberwolves are known for their defense. Their defense is going to be the same, if not even better, with certain matchups without Karl Towns. I know he has improved defensively. He does a lot for them on the glass as well. He is very willing to take some difficult matchups on at this point in time for the team and do whatever they need him to do. But they do have a really awesome replacement coming off the bench in Naz Reid, who everybody in Minnesota loves. My guy Garrett talked about him at length when he came on the podcast several months ago at this point in time. But that being said, Naz Reid is just incredible. He certainly should be a finalist for Sixth Man of the Year. I already gave up my pick as Norm Powell. But that being said, Naz Reid is awesome, and he's already had a couple really big games in the absence of Karl Towns. So it is exciting to see somebody who's way overqualified to be a backup big man and somebody that is just so skilled get an opportunity to shine. So again, I could see the Wolves holding down the ship steady and won't fall too far without Towns, but it is disappointing to say the least, especially for a guy in Towns who's been pretty durable this year. But Anthony Edwards did take advantage of it right away. He had a 44-point game against the Pacers a couple days ago at this point in time and capped off an insane fourth quarter with a game-winning block in which he literally hit his head on the rim. Like, he smashed his head on the rim in route of literally pinning Aaron Nesmith of the Pacers against the glass. And it was easily my favorite play of the year. And now Anthony Edwards, off the top of my head, I didn't do a ton of research on this going in, but my top two favorite plays of the entire season are both on behalf of Anthony Edwards. Of course, that block that I just described, and then a couple months ago at this point when he actually faked out Xavier Tillman, current Celtic and former Grizzly, like threw it off, like crossed him up first, then threw it off the glass, then dunked. It was so clean. Anthony Edwards is incredible to watch. I know he had a pretty awful game the next night because that's just what it's going to be like for a young player in the NBA that's not quite at that superstar level every single night, but this is an awesome moment for Ant to really prove himself without Karl Towns being healthy. Moving on to the next injury news that I felt like was worth mentioning, that Ben Simmons unfortunately is going to be out for the year. I think he's only really played in a handful of games this year, which is sad to think about because, look, as much as I like to clown on Ben Simmons just because of his behavior and the way he kind of carries himself, not as much just because I'm frustrated with the injuries, which is definitely part of it as well. But I just wanted to point out how terrible the subsequent moves that the Nets made to end up with Ben Simmons look. Like, obviously, the main reason they ended up with Ben Simmons is because James Harden was, quitting on his second team at that point in time and demanded a trade from the Brooklyn Nets, and their hands were kind of tied, so they were able to recoup Ben Simmons and some draft picks as well. But more importantly, just like the move that they made to get Harden and then the move to acquire Ben Simmons, it's just left them in a total dumpster fire. And it's worth revisiting just how bad that was, because just to acquire James Harden in the first place, the Nets traded away Jared Allen, Taurean Prince, Karis LeVert, some other guy I haven't heard of, as well as 3 first-round picks and 4 first-round pick swaps. And again, that was to get, basically prime James Harden from the Houston Rockets. Obviously, he was wearing the fat suit at that point in time back in 2021, but still, they gave up so much capital to get James Harden because that's who Kyrie and Kevin Durant wanted. Of course, everything in Brooklyn starts to blow up when James Harden demands a trade, and then they are forced to basically trade away Harden. They receive Ben Simmons, and they did get 2 first-round picks back. But just those moves that Ben Simmons is kind of tied to is really the reason why I think the Nets are one of the worst and most unpredictable situations in the entire NBA. They really don't have a direction. And again, I could see themselves looking like the Bulls in short order here if they don't start stripping it down to the parts and trading away valuable assets like Mikal Bridges. So really unfortunate for Ben Simmons, but I think at this point, the reason why I bring up those trades is because he's probably toast at this point in time. Like, let's call it what it is. The odds that this guy comes back, plays more than 50 games in a season, and continues to have a large impact, especially with some of the developmental issues he already had, like his behaviors all over the place, his unwillingness to shoot the ball, the mental struggles he went through in the playoffs. Like, he needs to work through those demons, and he can't even stay healthy enough on the court to even play in like 30 games. So I think it's GG's for Ben Simmons at this point in time. The next injury news that I want to talk about is Alperen Şengün. He's actually had definitely his best game of the entire year against the Spurs a couple nights ago at this point in time, in which he put up 45 points, 16 boards, and 5 steals against Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. He was just working Wemby, my pick for Defensive Player of the Year. I don't know if I think he should win it, but again, I think he will win it. working him like an absolute speed bag. Like, he was giving him unbelievable moves in the post. He was hitting some shots from the outside as well. Şengün was so good, and it is super disappointing to report that 3 games later, after that game against the Spurs, he suffered an injury on like literally the last play of the game, in which the Rockets actually beat the Kings, I believe. But it looked like a miserable injury in which Şengün looked like he broke his leg. He could have broken his ankle. It could have been a knee injury. He actually escaped with a relatively minor injury for how awful it looks. I implore you guys to not look it up. It was actually only a grade 3 ankle sprain, and as well as a bone bruise of the knee. But for what it's worth, Şengün's definitely done for the season. It does suck because he was having a fantastic campaign. That being said, he is going to be done for the year. There's no chance that Houston at this point, they're not playing for anything, so they're not going to want to bring him back. So with that, let's move on and get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, which is the 2023 NBA redraft. So again, this is a concept I can't pretend like I've invented, but I think I am the first one to do it for the 2023 class. I think this is a really interesting time to, again, take a look at the current NBA rookies, minus Chet. Let me just say again, minus Chet, because Chet was actually drafted as part of the 2022 draft. He was just hurt all of last year, so even though we consider him a rookie because this is his first season in the NBA, he was not a part of this draft class, so he's not going to be in this redraft. But beyond that, again, it's a really fascinating time to look at these rookies besides Chet, just because this is a crucial time in the year, right? Like, for the most part, a lot of the rookies we're going to be talking about, they were taken with relatively high picks in last year's draft, so therefore they're on pretty bad teams. And at this point in the season, the bad teams are really going to let their young talent just kind of ride. And so that's kind of what March and April is for the non-competitive teams, the teams that aren't thinking about the playoffs. They should be and will be turning the keys over to their younger players to really see what they're working with. And so this is really a crucial time to be dialed in on these rookies, and I have been a bit lately. And I just want to get my take out there before anyone else, just to kind of go through this exercise for the first time, that again, if these teams that drafted 9 months ago, 8 months ago at this point, last June, July, and took a look at what we knew now in this current rookie class, had all this information available, how would that reshape the draft? What would the picks look like? So let's start off with the first overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. It's absolutely the same. It is still Victor Wembanyama. Of course, the San Antonio Spurs did have this pick. They decided to make the move to pick up Victor Wembanyama, and that's absolutely the right choice. It's a home run. I've talked about Wemby ad nauseum on this podcast. I'll read you the stats at this point in time because they seem to be increasing by the night. 21 points a game, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. How many blocks is he at right now? I think he's at nearly 4. He's at 3.5 blocks and about a steal and a half as well. The 3-point percentage is still shaky, and he's gunning at least 5 threes a game, shooting about 33% from deep. So I do think that will improve with time. But look, the full body of work is there with Victor Wembanyama. He is the best prospect we have had since LeBron James, him being the chosen one before he was even drafted. I don't know if we'll ever, in my lifetime at least, see a prospect as good as LeBron, but I'm very confident in saying Wemby's the best prospect we've had since LeBron, and I think Wemby has lived up to it so far. He has lived up to the hype, which is really impressive for the expectations around this guy. He's already a generational defensive player, and on offense, he seems to be taking on more and more each night. Some of the playmaking is there, some of the outside shooting is there, the ball handling is there. It's just extremely exciting to watch. The Spurs are one of my favorite teams to watch in the NBA, despite how terrible they are, just because Wemby is so exciting to watch. I know, again, there isn't much to explain why he should still be the number 1 overall pick, but I did just want to mention how ridiculous I think it was that this past week there were folks out there, ESPN mainly, were the ones I saw covering it in regards of talking about how there should be this pressure on the Spurs to win because Wemby's so competitive, and that they should feel a pressure to get some more competitive players around Wembanyama over the next couple of years, because who knows if Wemby's going to want to be in that losing environment, and basically hinting toward like trying to make a story out of Wemby being uncomfortable and being unhappy in San Antonio when obviously he's a few months into his career at this point. There's no reason to do that. It just sucks that is kind of in the middle of the season. That's what we have to talk about. Like, it's one thing if we're talking about that in June and July and August. Like, anything goes, man. You're in the dog days of the off season. Like, whatever you can think of for content is probably worth getting out there. But for you to say that in the middle of the season when there's all this stuff to talk about, it's like, who cares, man? Like, nobody has ever declined the rookie max extension yet. Nobody's been brave enough to have that offer from a team and step away from it. There was talks about that with Luka. There were talks about that with Zion. Like, would those guys be so good and unhappy with their situations, but they want out? I don't think, and it never happened with them. It's never happened before. I don't think Wemby is dumb enough to walk away from San Antonio. I mean, who knows? He's still a couple years away from that decision. And again, by all likelihood, Wemby is going to be spending at least the first 8 years of his career with San Antonio, and most likely longer than that too, because they would be super dumb to move on from that guy. So again, I know Wemby's competitive. I know he wants to win. And hey, look, I'd love to see the Spurs go out there and make a splash and try to field a competitive roster around him sooner rather than later. But I said this before the Spurs even won the draft lottery. I said the Spurs needed Wembanyama the most because they were and still are, besides Wemby, the most devoid of talent roster in the entire NBA. Like, even Charlotte had guys, Houston had guys, Detroit had a couple guys on there that you could put on the posters that you can, build around, that whatever. San Antonio had nobody besides Victor Wembanyama. Like, it is a bare bones roster, as we've all seen, because the team is clearly struggling. So I just don't understand what the expectations were. Even with Wemby being as good as advertised, it's like, dude, we never thought this team was going to be any type of decent. So let's just give it some time before we start trying to make stories of Victor being unhappy in San Antonio when he hasn't spoke on that at all. Moving on to the number 2 pick in the 2023 NBA redraft, the Hornets are at this spot. And I'm actually going to keep this pick the same as well. This is where I would have the Hornets again, taking Brandon Miller, the same selection that they made several months ago. I think the top 2 is set in stone. I think there's really only 2 guys in this draft class that are most likely to be real superstar players. Wemby probably already is and absolutely will be in a couple years. And Brandon Miller is showing all the signs in Charlotte that they crushed that pick and that he could be a superstar player as well. For him to be like 6'7", 6'8", just a rangy wing that's already finding creative ways to score. He looks really smooth out there handling the ball. Statistically, I know he is really able to run wild and do whatever he wants in Charlotte, especially with LaMelo Ball playing in barely any games this year. But on the season, he is averaging 17 points a game, 4 rebounds, a couple assists as well, shooting the ball from a decent clip, 44% from the field and 37% from deep. But it's really just the eye test. Like, he's doing stuff on both ends of the court. He's had some incredible chase down blocks as well. It is really painful to watch the Hornets, but every time I do watch him, it's like, they got that pick right. So congratulations to Charlotte. Any team would love to have a wing and somebody as athletic and somebody that has the offensive ability that Brandon Miller does. So this pick was a no-brainer. The draft and the redraft, for that matter, really does start at 3 for the sake of this exercise. So let's move on and talk about the Portland Trailblazers, who again had the 3rd overall pick in this past year's rookie draft. At the time they made the selection of taking Scoot Henderson, and you can call me crazy, but I think in this redraft, I would have the Portland Trailblazers selecting Keyonte George, who is, of course, currently on the Utah Jazz. And you guys can call me crazy. I'm going to be very transparent in saying there's definitely a tier break after Wemby, and there's certainly another tier break after Brandon Miller. You could make the argument for a lot, like at least 5 different guys at number 3. But if you are the Portland Trailblazers, here's why I think they ultimately land on Keyonte. Keyonte's looked really good for Utah. I know Utah isn't super deep at guard. I mean, they have a lot of guys that have bounced around a little bit and certainly have talent, like guys like Colin Sexton. Chris Dunn has been like a rehabilitation project for them in Utah. And then, of course, Jordan Clarkson's still a really valuable scorer off the bench for them as well. And so, that being said, they don't have a ton of ball handlers, though. Like, their best player is Lauri Markkanen, who can score from the wing, but even he's been banged up a lot recently. And really, over the past couple months, they've really turned the keys over to Keyonte George. And I just think he looks the part. And again, if you're the Portland Trailblazers, you're big game hunting. Like, there are some guys in the draft that we're going to talk about very soon that are already extremely polished players in the NBA that can play a role, can make a really positive impact to winning basketball teams. But when you're the Portland Trailblazers, you're not a winning basketball team. You need somebody. You need to, again, you still need to swing for the fences with this pick. And while there's 2 locked in guys that have superstar potential above them, I think Keyonte is the next best opportunity as a guy that could develop into a star. My Celtics just played him last night, and again, he just has some really wow moments on both ends of the court. I think his vision is extremely solid. Shooting the ball has been solid as well. Even defensively, he has some ability there as well. He's 6'4". He looks the part of really these star guards in the league. And his stats in the season aren't as impressive as what they've been over the last 15 games or so. But on the season, he is averaging 13 points a game, 3 rebounds, nearly 5 assists per game as well. 40% from the field and 36% from deep. And again, I just think that if you're looking for a guy that can handle the ball and eventually maybe turn into a star player for the Portland Trailblazers, I think Keyonte George is the best option. Let's move on to the number 4 pick in the 2023 NBA redraft, in which the Rockets originally had this pick and decided to select Amen Thompson several months ago. But in this redraft, I have the Houston Rockets taking Jaime Jaquez Jr. of currently the Miami Heat. So let's talk about it. Jaime Jaquez, everybody loved him before the draft as a really pro-ready player. He was a little bit older. He was a 4-year player at UCLA. He's already 23 years old. And everybody was pissed when he ends up with the Miami Heat because it's like, of course they get the guy that everybody thinks is pro-ready, that everybody thinks can contribute at a high level. And they were absolutely right. Again, it feels like one of those like facepalm moments where it's like, wow, the 4-year player that looked really polished at UCLA is going to step in and make a positive impact. It's like, yes, but usually the history of those guys, they don't often evolve into anything more than that. And if you're picking in the top 5 of the NBA draft, you usually want to swing for the fences. That being said, the Rockets already have a really solid foundation in place. I think Şengün has already developed into a young star in this league and is going to continue to develop. Jalen Green has obviously had some moments. I think Jabari Smith, I think the jury's probably out on him being a star, certainly one on the offensive end of the court, but he's still a really productive player, a guy I really like. And it seems like, the Rockets with Ime, with the identity that they're trying to build, like they're trying to be at least frisky and at least be competitive right now. They signed Fred VanVleet in the offseason. And for them to select and have the ability to select somebody who's 6'6" but plays way bigger than that, he's already averaging 13 points a game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists for the Miami Heat. He can really just do everything. And there's even an argument to be made that he should be taken at 3 by the Portland Trail Blazers. But again, I just think at Jaquez's age, I just don't know if I ever see him being like a full-blown star in the NBA, and I absolutely could be wrong in saying that, but he's already a really smart player on both ends of the court. He knows how to contribute. He knows how to be additive to a team that's trying to be competitive, as he's shown with the Miami Heat. Again, he plays really way bigger than what he is. He's a really great defender and an underrated passer as well. I just like all the decisions he makes on the court above all else. Solid shooter. I just think he's a really sure thing. You already know you're getting a really great player in Jaime Jaquez, so I feel pretty comfortable with where the Rockets are right now that they would take him at number 4. Moving on to the 5th pick in the 2023 NBA redraft. The Detroit Pistons had this pick several months ago, and they decided to select Ausar Thompson. In this redraft, I have the Pistons going with Cam Whitmore of the Houston Rockets. And I know it might sound pretty crazy going for yet another player that was outside of the lottery and the actual 2023 draft. Cam Whitmore actually went all the way at pick number 20. But that was kind of controversial and certainly really surprising as it was happening. There were rumors from really reputable sources that Cam Whitmore was going to go as high as like number 4 or 5 in this draft class anyway. Like, he had so much pedigree. His athletic profile was off the charts. He was a really talented scorer in college as well. There were some worries about a knee injury, I think. Those were some rumors, and I don't know if we ever really got to the bottom of that. But Cam Whitmore has looked unbelievable and looks like certainly the best rookie on the Houston Rockets. I know he doesn't love to pass. He averages about a half assist a game, but the dude's a bucket. I mean, he's 6'7". Again, athletically, really on both ends of the court too. I know you could probably question where he's at mentally on defense a lot of the time, but certainly he makes some wow plays on both ends of the court with how athletic he is, and he's just so smooth to watch. Again, he's a really talented scorer already. He's only 19 years old, and as a guy that had the pedigree, and I just think if you're the Detroit Pistons, again, you'd still want somebody a little bit younger because you're certainly a ways away of competing. You want somebody that's going to be able to go out there and create your own shot above all else. I think that's what the Pistons team needs. You need somebody that's willing and able to score the basketball at a high level. I know he's averaging 12 points a game for the Rockets, but I'm confident if you put Cam Whitmore on this year's Pistons, he's probably averaging at least 18 points a game, and I say that as a relatively conservative estimate if Monty Williams just lets him go out there and cook. I think Cam Whitmore has a ton of potential, and I think he would be a really good fit for the Pistons at number 5 in this redraft. Moving on to the number 6 pick in this 2023 redraft. This is where the Orlando Magic originally selected Anthony Black several months ago, but in this redraft, I have the Magic taking Derek Lively Jr. at number 6 in this draft. Derek Lively has been awesome for the Dallas Mavericks at this point in time. You could definitely make the argument that Derek Lively should actually be going a bit higher, but again, as much as I love Derek Lively and how awesome he's looked for the Mavericks, it is hard to imagine Derek Lively in a better basketball situation than where he is with the Mavericks. Then again, he has been so good, there's no way he would make it to pick 10 or 12 or wherever the Mavericks ended up taking him originally. But that being said, he is a fantastic rim protector. His athleticism jumps off the screen. He's 7 feet tall, maybe even a little taller. Like, he is the quintessential big man that you would want in the NBA in terms of a rebounder, in terms of a rim protector, in terms of somebody that's a lob threat and is willing to go to the basket. That being said, he still just doesn't have a jump shot to speak of. And so that's still a real concern for teams that want to have a more modern approach, to have better spacing, to have somebody that's a threat in a pick and pop, to at least just stand in the corner and still pull the defense away from the rim. Derek Lively, that's just not something he's able to do at this point in time. That being said, there's still plenty of uses for players like this in the NBA, but having him go in the top 5 might still just be a little out there. But who knows? He is young. He could develop a jump shot. We've seen a lot of big men in the current NBA that started their careers without a jump shot, and then as the game changed, they worked on it and grew it. So who knows? Maybe Derek Lively develops a jumper and then he becomes really dangerous. But I think that the Magic at pick 6 would have to take him because he is, like, in my opinion, certainly the best available and the most sure thing product at this point in time in this redraft. I think that they could move on from Wendell Carter, and Derek Lively could make a really fantastic defense in the Orlando Magic. I think he would be a defensive upgrade over Wendell Carter, and he would make that team even better. So I think that the Magic would just have to take the best available player and go with Lively, and they would be even scarier, really, on both ends of the court. Moving on to number 7, the Indiana Pacers. They originally selected Bilal Coulibaly and then traded him to the Wizards. And so ultimately the Pacers ended up with Jarris Walker essentially from this pick at number 7 a few months ago in the actual draft. But in this redraft, I actually have the Pacers sticking with Coulibaly, and they just don't end up trading him to the Wizards. And now this is a hot take, I guess you could say, because it is really difficult for me to evaluate Coulibaly on the Wizards. The Wizards are, again, just an absolutely brutal watch. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, and so I really do have to force myself to watch him every once in a while and try to go back and watch some highlights and whatever. But I think that the Pacers are competitive enough where they could draft based on need here. And I think they have such an obvious need in the fact that they are an abysmal defensive team. They really don't have a true defensive stopper. And I think Coulibaly, with his height being 6'7", 6'8", and just an absurd wingspan, and again, athleticism that really leaps off the screen for when you do watch him. Some of the steals he comes up with, some of the blocks he comes up with is a perfect fit for what this Pacers team needs. Like, they have plenty of ball handlers. They have quite a few shot creators as well, with Mathurin coming along. Halliburton's, obviously, this has been a breakout campaign if you really weren't paying attention last year. And I think Coulibaly can step into this team, immediately even be a starter on the Pacers as well, and maybe be even an upgrade over that Nesmith spot if Rick Carlisle's willing to give Coulibaly enough leash in this hypothetical scenario. But he can at least still shoot the ball at a really decent clip as well. I know he plays a ton of minutes for Washington, and even despite how much he plays, his numbers aren't impressive. He's averaging 8 points a game, 4 boards, and 2 assists. But he is shooting the ball 35% from 3, which is manageable. You're not super worried of him shooting out there, but you at least have to respect him. And we kind of knew the book on Coulibaly coming in was that he was really raw, right? Like, he's like a young 19 years old. Like, he was 18 at the time of being drafted, I want to say. So that being said, people knew he was going to be more of a project, more of a longer term play, if you will. And so the fact that the Pacers are competitive and they still want to draft based on needs in this scenario, I think they'd be willing to let him develop, and eventually he could become a lockdown defender for them, essentially. And at the very least, he could step in right away and still contribute at a high level on the defensive end of the court. Moving on to the number 8 spot in this redraft. This is where the Washington Wizards actually, again, they did take Coulibaly with this spot after the trade with the Pacers. So at this number 8 spot, I do have the Wizards drafting the guy that ultimately went 3 overall in Scoot Henderson, currently of the Portland Trail Blazers. You knew Scoot was going to slide in this exercise because it just really hasn't looked good with him. He's had a bunch of different injuries. The jump shot has been really suspect for Scoot. And even him just like getting to the basket at will, like a lot of people thought he was going to be able to do when they were looking at his G League tape and everything like that. It just seems like things have been a lot harder than people anticipated for Scoot Henderson. But that being said, if you're the Washington Wizards, again, you still need to swing for the fences. You still need somebody that you can eventually build your franchise around. And there's a reason that Scoot at times was going to be looked at as like potentially the number 2 prospect overall in this draft. I feel like for most of the draft process, he was looked at as the number 2 prospect behind Victor Wembanyama. So I knew he was going to slide just because, again, it has looked pretty bad. He's had some injuries, but I think that this is a really logical spot for him to go because the Wizards still need to swing for the fences. They have needs all over the place. And for them to get a ball handler and be able to give Scoot all the run he needs to go out there and develop, I think it makes a lot of sense for Scoot Henderson to go number 8 to the Wizards in this exercise. Moving on to number 9, this is where the Utah Jazz selected Taylor Hendricks several months ago. I have them taking Amen Thompson in this exercise. The Thompsons are absolutely brutal for me to evaluate because like they look so special. They look as advertised on defense. Even some of the IQ stuff, like the way, especially Amen, who again is going with this pick at number 9 to the Jazz in this exercise. On offense, he's a really great playmaker as well. Like it does seem like he sees the game well. He makes some really great passes. He has a decent number of assists as well. That being said, the jump shot is such an insane, like it's beyond concerning. Like it is almost a death sentence for these Thompson twins. Like you know that they would slide in this exercise because I know people weren't necessarily expecting them to be knocked down coming into the league, but it's been gross. Statistically for the Rockets, Amen Thompson has been putting up 8 points a game. He's a really good rebounder as well. He's been averaging 6 boards a game, 2 assists. He's shooting 16% from 3 on, he's pretty reluctant to shoot. He only shoots about 1 3 a game, but it is just gross. It doesn't look good, doesn't feel good. So that being said, just because shooting is such a concern that's why I had to knock him a little bit. Originally, he went 4 to the Rockets. I have him going 9 to the Jazz in this exercise. But I think the Jazz, again, in this exercise, they don't get Keontae George. They don't get Taylor Hendricks. I think they'd be open to just taking a gamble on the highest ceiling guy available on the board, who I definitely think would be Amen Thompson in this scenario. Moving on to the 10th pick in this redraft, this is where the Dallas Mavericks actually selected Cason Wallace and then flipped him for Derek Lively. But in this exercise, Lively is certainly off the board. So I have the Mavericks grabbing Brandon Podziemski of the Golden State Warriors. So Podziemski's actually gotten a lot of room to cook this year. He's even starting now over Klay Thompson for the Golden State Warriors. He's averaging 10 points a game on the season, 6 rebounds a game, which is really awesome despite only being 6'4". He's averaging 4 assists per game as well. So I know everyone on the Mavericks is seemingly undersized, so he would fit right in. But if you ask Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd, they probably think that they're title contenders. So with them having the 10th pick in this redraft exercise, I just think that they would grab the most ready to go player and the person that can immediately step in and contribute, because they have gaping holes all over the place on this roster. And so the fact that Podziemski's been able to immediately contribute on a Golden State team that I think for the most part is pretty deep is impressive. Like, he's really fearless out there. Like, he is really talented as a scorer as well. He's not afraid to get to the basket, and I just like a lot of the decisions that he makes. And I think he would just be a really solid connector and somebody that can space the floor as well for the Mavericks in this exercise. So I really like the landing spot of him going to Dallas at the 10 spot in this exercise. Moving on to number 11, this is where the Orlando Magic picked Jett Howard just a few months ago. It is really funny because, again, before the draft, I was texting my buddy Connor about like guys that the Celtics could take. And I know originally the Celtics had like a pick in the 20s and they ended up trading back a couple times, and they ended up with Jordan Walsh, who's only played in a handful of games for us this year. But when I was texting Connor, I was like, yeah, like we're going back and forth with guys we think might be available at 20 if we keep the pick. And I was like, yeah, I think Jett Howard could be a great get at 20. Like, that's around where he's mocked or whatever. And he ends up going number 11 to the Magic, and everybody's like, what the hell are the Magic doing? Sure enough, Jett Howard really cannot crack the Orlando Magic roster at this point in time, especially with how many wings that they have. So he's certainly not going to be talked about on this episode any longer. That being said, at the 11th pick in this redraft, I have the Orlando Magic grabbing Cason Wallace, who is currently on the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this is my favorite pick yet of this fictional exercise that I made up. I would absolutely love to see Cason Wallace on the Orlando Magic. Cason Wallace has been a solid contributor for the Thunder. Again, this is a team that's literally atop the standings in the Western Conference. If they're not number 1, they're right there at the time of recording this episode. He's putting up decent stats. He's averaging 7 points a game, 2 rebounds, a couple assists. But this man's really just a lockdown 3-and-D guard already. And I think the fit of Cason Wallace alongside Jalen Suggs would just be unbelievable, and it would make a Magic team that's already terrifying on defense even scarier. And he's actually shooting the best percentage of the rookies that actually play in this year's draft. He's shooting nearly 43% from 3. He just sits in the corner and just doesn't miss, I guess, for the most part for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Again, he doesn't get a ton of burn as a ball handler because they have Shea, because they have Jalen Williams, they have Josh Giddey. So, again, they're not really asking him to be a conventional point guard, so it'd be interesting to see if he could be a real connective piece and a true point guard for the Orlando Magic. I can't pretend like I watched Wallace a lot in college, but that being said, I love his game. I definitely think the Magic are the big winners of this fictional exercise, so he would be a no-brainer pick for the Orlando Magic at number 11 in this exercise. Moving on to the 12th pick in this draft, this is where the Oklahoma City Thunder, again, originally drafted Derek Lively and flipped him for Cason Wallace, but unfortunately for the Thunder, Cason Wallace is off the board, so I have the Thunder taking Asar Thompson at number 12 in this redraft exercise. Again, I hate to group the Thompson twins together, but I'm sure they've been compared their whole lives, so I'll just kind of join right in with that. I don't know what to do with Asar Thompson either. He's been solid for Detroit, right? I know that they've been a dumpster fire. Again, he's a really incredible rebounder despite being, 6'6", 6'7", whatever. He's averaging 9 points a game, nearly 7 rebounds a game, 2 assists per game. There's a block a game, a steal a game. But again, the jump shot is absolutely abysmal. He's shooting 18% from three. And it's just a huge question mark. Like how much of a positive impact can you make in the game as like a guard or a wing when you really just, cannot space the floor at all for your team at this point in time. And look, maybe he develops. Obviously, I just talked about Jalen Suggs. If people can continue to develop their jump shot like Jalen Suggs has done, which is really unheard of growth from Suggs, by the way, at least from his development from three-point land. Like if the Thompson twins can study that and mimic that, I mean, they would go a lot higher than where I have them going in this exercise. But again, I have to think that teams are considerably worried about both Thompson's jump shots. So that's why I have Amen going at 9 and Asar going at 12 for the Thunder. But I think the Thunder would ultimately pull the trigger on Asar Thompson because, look, they've shown that they're not in a huge rush to immediately add to the core that they already have and immediately trade a bunch of their draft assets to try to get even more competitive and make a run this year. I think if they were really all in on that idea, they would have at least picked up another big man. And I'd love to draft them another big man in this exercise. But besides Lively, I just don't think any of the bigs in this current year's draft have really jumped out to me anyways. So I think the Thunder would, again, kind of take the best available player, take the highest ceiling, and take somebody that at the very least, if they were able to work Asar into their rotation this year, I think he'd be able to at least help them out in their abysmal rebounding rate. So because of how good he is on the defensive end of the court and how good he is in the glass as well. So that is where I have Asar Thompson going at 12 to the Thunder. Moving on to number 13, this is where the Raptors picked Grady Dick several months ago. Similar strategy. I have them just grabbing Jordan Hawkins instead. I just think he is a better shooter. I think he's a better overall player. I think when Jordan Hawkins is out there, he looks really impressive. He's just on a super deep Pelicans team, so he's in the rotation, he's out of the rotation, his minutes are up, his minutes are down. It's a really tough situation for a rookie, but he's been able to stay locked in, and I think I just kind of like the eye test. I've been really impressed from what I saw from Jordan Hawkins so far. Averaging 9 points a game for the Pelicans, 3 boards, a couple of assists as well. Shooting 37% from deep, and I do expect that to improve. I just think he's a really smooth player, and I think the Rockets are in need of offensive talent and people that can space the floor alongside of Scotty Barnes. And I think if they could get a guy like Jordan Hawkins instead of Grady Dick, I think that's what the Raptors would do, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Moving on to the number 14 pick in this exercise, where the New Orleans Pelicans originally selected Jordan Hawkins several months ago. I have the Pelicans grabbing Anthony Black. And this is tough. Like, I don't really know what the Pelicans need. They do have depth all over the place, and it would be helpful for them to have a quintessential point guard, and I don't pretend to understand that Anthony Black is that. But for what it's worth, Anthony Black could be like a kind of like a reclamation of the Dyson Daniels project. They could just kind of re-roll that draft pick again and see if it works out a little bit better with Anthony Black. He is 6'7". He can play the guard position. He's a solid defender. And even jump shooting wise, he's a little bit better from three than I thought. I know he's only taking like 2 threes a game, but he is shooting almost 40% from three, which is solid. It's just tough for him to get consistent minutes with how many injuries the Orlando Magic backcourt has had. Suggs is in there. Gary Harris is in and out. You have guys like Cole Anthony that have been in and out and hurt, and same thing with Markelle Fultz. So it's just hard for Black to carve out this role, but he did go 6th in the original draft, and I think a team like the Pelicans would still like to take a swing at them in this exercise. So that is going to do it for the redraft exercise. I should have prefaced this by saying I'm only doing the lottery. You don't need to hear me talk about a full 30 draft picks of rookies, but I did want to go through the top 14 picks, and I am going to rehash this one more time. So if we were to redraft the 2023 NBA draft with the information that we have available today, this is what I think the draft would look like. At number 1, I still have the Spurs taking Victor Wembanyama. At number 2, I still have the Charlotte Hornets drafting Brandon Miller. At number 3, I have the Blazers grabbing Keontae George. At number 4, I have the Rockets grabbing Jaime Jaquez Jr. At number 5, I have the Pistons grabbing Cam Whitmore. At number 6, I have the Magic grabbing Derek Lively. At number 7, I have the Pacers grabbing Bilal Coulibaly. At number 8, I have the Wizards grabbing Scoot Henderson. At number 9, I have the Jazz grabbing Amen Thompson. At number 10, I have the Mavericks grabbing Brandon Przemski. At number 11, I have the Magic drafting Cason Wallace. At number 12, I have the Thunder drafting Asar Thompson. At number 13, I have the Raptors drafting Jordan Hawkins. And finally, at the last spot in the lottery, I have the New Orleans Pelicans taking Anthony Black. Let me know what you think, guys. Again, it's an exciting time. It's a fun time. But that being said, it's also a time that's kind of difficult on my end because I could look really dumb in just a couple of weeks if one of these guys catches fire, if one of these guys really starts to put it together. And it's just an exciting exercise, and it's kind of funny to look back on just how quickly things change in the NBA. I did have, 4 guys that weren't even drafted in the lottery kind of sneaking their way into the lottery. You could probably make the argument for a few other guys as well. I'm open to really anything after picks 1 and 2, so definitely give me some feedback and let me know what you think of that 2023 NBA redraft order. So that being said, guys, that is going to do it for today's episode. I will be back next week, and I know I've been saying this for a while, but I promise to have a guest on next week to talk about one of the contending teams in the Eastern Conference. That is the only hint I will give you guys. But before I let you go, be sure to follow Words with Wallace on everything. That includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow on social media as well. Still Words with Wallace. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Be sure to follow the podcast on all those socials, and I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.